as an enablement professional, we have an opportunity to control the madness by providing structure. Other people have expectations around, like, if my seller goes to this training, they'll be ready and fully ramped after an hour with you. One thing that I think is crucial to avoiding that is just making sure that you position yourself in enablement as that strategic partner and not a vending machine. If you're a vending machine, you'll constantly be chasing the last thing that they requested, and it is a what have you done for me lately shiny object thing. So, like, do I need to run the super tenured enterprise strategic sellers through an intro to discovery workshop? Probably not. But what would be helpful to them?
Hey folks, this is Michael Ocean, founder and CEO of SellMeThisPen. Today I'm super pumped to have Brooke Bachesta on the show. A little bit about her background. She started as an SDR, got into management, then led enablement for leading brands like Outreach, and now she's the director of learning design at JLL. So today we're going to chat about Everboarding to see if it's just a fancier version of onboarding or if it can really change the way we support our revenue orgs. Brooke, how's it going?
I'm great, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's nice to see you again.
Of course, it's always a pleasure. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey? Did you end up in sales? And yeah.
Sure. Like Michael said, I lead learning and design at JLL, which is a real estate company. And my journey into this role was a little bit all over the place. I got into sales right out of college. I had an English degree and I didn't know what I was going to do with that. So I think, like most people with a liberal arts background, you end up in sales or marketing. So I found myself in sales in the Bay Area, and it was totally different than what I expected. I think I honestly had a really negative perception of what sales was prior to getting into SaaS. I had this thought that I had to be like a smooth talking, hard negotiating, like Wolf of Wall Street style person. And that's not necessarily the case at all. What I found was that it's highly process driven. So, like, if your brain works in structure and playbooks, you'll probably like selling in software. You're obviously in charge of your own number. You have your own quota, but you're on a team. There's a lot of team environment, camaraderie, which I really liked. And the industry was a ton of fun. So that's how I got my start. I ended up moving back to Seattle from the Bay Area. Got another SDR job, like Michael mentioned. I got into management, leading BDR teams. I had a short stint as an account executive, back into management as a BDR. And I think what I had really enjoyed about all of the selling aspects of, like, being customer facing, opportunities to present, certainly as a people leader, I was onboarding and training all the time. And I realized that, hey, this thing called enablement, I really like all those aspects of it, the program building, the facilitating, the stakeholder management. And so I had shared that with my boss at the time, and he and I just kind of kept in contact about, like, there's nothing available right now. Thanks for letting me know. Fast forward about a year and a half, and an opportunity popped up at my last job, Outreach, to get into enablement. And I had an opportunity to work for a woman named Whitney. She's great. And that's how I got my start in enablement. I was running BDR enablement for their global biz dev team, which was a ton of fun. I think it gave me a nice opportunity to transition from frontline management to now they were my stakeholders. And I had the luxury of, I had all those relationships already. I knew the job pretty intimately. And so that was a ton of fun. And now transitioning my job at JLL, still enablement. So I'm still doing program management, stakeholder management, building a bunch of stuff. But the scope is quite a bit bigger. I'm working with all different types of sellers, customer-facing folks, biz dev teams, and then in a very different industry. I'm in real estate now. So I still work with folks who sell software. So there's still kind of that crossover there. But it's been an interesting journey of kind of hopping around. And I feel fortunate that I've just had, when opportunities have come up, I've had the luxury of saying, yeah, sure, I'll give that a shot. And been lucky. It's worked out okay so far.
I love it. Like, it's so interesting that, you had all this back and forth with, SaaS and tech, and then ended up in real estate. And some people never actually get this chance. They always think, with one industry, let's just go forever, tech or whatever it might be. And, you got the opportunities just to do, other things. And it's very interesting. Thanks for sharing. Look, I want to start the conversation by reading something from Harvard Business Review, because it's really shocking to me, but then I get your thoughts on it. So 33% of new hires look for a new job within their first 6 months on the job. 23% of new hires turn over before their first work anniversary. The organizational costs of employee turnover range between 100% and 300% of the employee's salary. It typically takes 8 months for a new hire to reach productivity. This is insane to me. And I believe it has something to do not only with the nature of our work as sellers, but the support system is starting with, onboarding. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of reasons. I think churn may be high right now, ranging from everything of just the state of the market as it is. We can't keep selling the way that we used to back in the good old days of SaaS pre-pandemic. Market conditions have certainly changed, and I think that applies to like the ways logistics, operations, the ways the books of business are set up, the equity in that. And then, yes, of course, the way that you are onboarded and brought into a company makes a huge difference in your perception and the way that you want to show up to work every day, knowing what kind of partnership you have. And so I think, yeah, onboarding plays an incredibly important role in that. And I think a lot of times what we in enablement may do is feel the need to try and boil the ocean and give people as much information as we can in a short amount of time. But I think what we're going to talk about today is Everboarding is just like an extended onboarding. Most folks are just trying to get their feet underneath them. And we've certainly seen this transition of like, it's not necessarily the boot camp of show up for 3 days in person at an office. We'll dump your brain full of information. Now go forth and sell. To be a much more sequential, longer term roadmap, because that's how people learn, is like they want to learn when it's necessary for them to learn that information. And I think if it's done really well, 100% it can help improve retention rates.
Interesting. So again, in my mind, Everboarding is sort of a shift from, to your point, a one-off event, whatever it might be, 3 days boot camp, or in my experience, when I started in tech, I was selling, Microsoft products, and I never forget this. They, assigned a computer to us, and we didn't have laptops those days. Said, okay, you sit down here, you log into your dashboard, and you watch these videos, and you go through all these question and answers and pick the right answer until you get it. All right, sure, let's give it a try. For 1 week, we had to go through modules after modules and after modules, and then it said, hit the phone. I'm like, I'm selling.
Seems like an abrupt transition.
I'm selling to CTOs. I don't even know what CTO means. Like, can you give me a little bit more, maybe practice, or just tell me at least who am I speaking with? And it seems like Everboarding, with the way you described it, whether it be, knowledge sharing or, continuous training and coaching, it's just a better support system for sellers that has no beginning and end. Did I get it correctly?
Yeah, and I think there's no beginning and end in that. It's continuous, right? There's a continuous cadence or an operating rhythm of professional development, and there's a clear through line, because it's one thing to just say, hey, we're going to have a training every week, and let me scramble to find a topic. But I think when you're thinking about professional development for the long term, the rhythm, the topics, and the structure, they all align. So not only do people know, hey, I show up to this thing. For us, we call it Power Hour. It happens every Tuesday, 8 a.m. Pacific and 5 p.m. Pacific, depending on your time zone. Show runs twice a day. And they know what they're going to get because there's a structure to your curriculum. Yeah, and I think it's just helpful for folks, because the truth is, individual contributors, myself included, like, we may not think of training, like going to these sessions, as a thing that's part of it. I'm just trying to get my job done. If I'm a seller, I'm just trying to get these deals over the line, and everything else I'm trying to filter out. So unless it is made painfully clear how relevant it is to getting that deal over the line, most people are going to deprioritize it. So trying to, again, find that through line of like, yes, this is happening on an ongoing basis. It's not, I don't want it to feel like compliance or rote level stuff of, like you said, like I'm going to do a module by myself alone, just to check, did I memorize something? Yeah. But if it's relevant to their job, and there's some way for them to connect and say that I can use this on the phone today, it becomes much more useful.
That makes sense. It should be really, I would say personalized to what your end users are doing. Otherwise, as a former seller, I was like, okay, sure. I just come to check the box and said, I'm a good guy. I just showed up to the training.
Right.
Just to be compliant.
I know that my attendance will be tracked, which is an important thing to track, to be fair. But if people know that, I would equate this to, say you have an all hands meeting and there's 3,000 people on that Zoom call. Most of us will probably join with the camera off and listen to it while we're doing something else, because it's like it's a one-to-many audience. And if the topic is so broad, I'll tune into the parts that I like, or maybe I'll just read the transcript into like a GPT thing to tell it back to me of what I missed. But yeah, it's so hard to gather attention when you're on remote environments. So like you said, making sure that it is super specific to that team, and we make it abundantly clear in the way that we're communicating about the topic. Here's how you can use this in your job on this timeline, etc.
Got it. So this is something that they can implement right away. So they don't basically feel this is just a task. I get some value that I can apply to if I have some pending deals or if I, struggle with handling certain situations. These courses are really designed for that situation. Can you tell me a little bit more about your program? I know you're working on something amazing, so I'm curious if you
Yeah,
can share.
yeah. So the project that I'm thinking of is, we call it Power Hour. So the enablement team that I'm on, there's a handful of us, about 5 if you include my leader, and we have a remit of a couple hundred sales reps. If I expand it to like all of the teams that we touch, there's about 600 people on this invite. It happens every single week, and so we've separated it because we've got 4 different, I guess, core groups of sellers. The first week of every month is an open to everybody. We call it our global power hour. Anyone who's on that distribution list is welcome to join. The second week of the month is always geared towards a group that we call client growth. Then we've got a group called solutions development. And then we've got the leader session at the end. And we make sure that each of those topics is relevant to them. And if you're wondering, like, okay, well, how did you make sure it was relevant? We just went and asked them. I think that's the easiest way to figure that out, as opposed to me guessing at things, which I have done. Yeah. Sometimes you get lucky, but worst case scenario is you run a bunch of sessions that are deemed irrelevant and not helpful, and people don't show up. So the first session, because we've got so many folks on there, we always make sure that it is to be a one size fits most, but still be relevant for revenue generating or like teams who touch revenue. We always do something around thought leadership. So, hey, what are some things that you can talk about on the phone to position you as a thought leader? So we did actually a session on how do you position yourself as a thought leader? And then we started slotting in topics like, how do I talk about AI and commercial real estate? How do I talk about data centers if my customers ask me? How do I talk about like what JLL stance is on some tech advancement? So we like to keep it discussion based. And then the second, those other weeks in between, we've essentially just gone to those leaders and we do what's called a manager preview. I do this every month. We try and have our curriculum set out almost on a quarter in advance, but every month we gather all the leaders together and we say, here's all the topics that we're planning on covering. Here's the learning outcomes. Now is your chance to opine, like, did we hit the mark or do we need to fix something before we run it? And it gives them an opportunity to say, yep, I'm glad you're talking about that product, but can you make sure that you talk about this aspect of the commercial process or this thing with legal because my team was confused? And then make sure that we give them something to react to. So it's not just like, what do you want to talk about? And with enough time to make some tweaks before we go live.
Makes sense. I love the fact that you partner up with, your frontline managers just to make sure that you're aligned. And I have a question on that, but I'm going to ask another question first because, since we're talking about individual contributors. So 600 people team, it's a large team. Obviously, like, yes, you have managers, you have a team of 5, you guys, definitely find a way to put some structure to it. And it seems like it's working for you guys. But how do you make sure that you get the engagement you need from these individuals? Because it's still a big group. So even if you, spread them over, 5 enablers or, different settings, it's just like 100 of people getting on the call. How do you make sure that you keep them engaged?
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is I cannot control what folks are doing. So we always remind folks, we start all of our sessions with just like an admin slide, basically, of a level setting. If you're going to be here, be here. We all know that you have deals that you're focused on. So if you know that you're going to be multitasking, just go do that. This will be recorded. We'll send it out to you after the fact. Believe it or not, the way to get people to pay attention is not to force them into breakout rooms. I've tried that. Folks don't always love that. So we just have to be really intentional of making sure that we're using technology like Slido for anonymous questions or polls throughout. We've built in interaction. We use a lot of like putting things in the chat or engaging with the stakeholders, and then prepping your SMEs, your subject matter experts, making sure that we do a couple run throughs with them so we can make sure that they're going slow enough, paying enough attention to slides that might be really heavy, importing opportunities for people to ask things in the chat. So I think like any virtual training, it just comes to being intentional because reading at people, there's a time and a place, but if you're trying to engage your audience, I think there's other ways to spice it up.
Makes sense. Look, I love the fact that you guys bring subject matter expert to this calls because, as a former seller, if someone just like tells me, hey, this is what they want to hear, I'm like, yeah, sure. But is it really the case? And the fact that you guys have this, resources to bring on the call, I think that will naturally help, with better engagement. Now, I want to ask about sales managers, frontline managers. Obviously, some folks, they support enablement. They want to be part of this everboarding, initiatives. Some others show, resistant. I wanted to hear, based on your experience, what are some of the major misalignments between enablement teams and sales leaders?
Yeah, I would say the misalignments that often, again, it comes to being intentional, and everybody's moving really quickly, right? They're just trying to get things off their desk and get their
Yep.
job done. So I think mistake number one, or pitfall number one, that's easy to fall into is making guesses without vetting. Oh, Michael's so busy, I didn't want to bug him. I made a guess on the training that his team wanted. I
Mm-hmm.
know that we're selling this product, so I'll just spin it up and not involving them, because you're immediately setting yourself up for perhaps you're going to crush it and you're a mind reader and you have exactly what that sales leader wanted, but chances are they have opinions or assumptions about what it is they're going to get. So I think, just failing to check with them. And around that alignment, it also comes to defining. The word training has many different definitions depending on who you're asking. Some people think it's stand and deliver. Other people see it as a full-on certification. Other people have expectations around, like, if my seller goes to this training, they'll be ready and fully ramped after an hour with you, right?
Yep.
And that may not always be the case. I think there's a lot of discussions that need to be had. And one thing that I think is crucial to avoiding that is just making sure that you position yourself in enablement as that strategic partner and not a vending machine. Because as soon as you do that, you will be spinning your wheels. Yeah. And what I mean by that, like the vending machine aspect is like, make me a training on discovery.
Mm-hmm.
For all my other enablement nerds out there, you're probably familiar with the ADDIE framework. Like step number one is to analyze. So just like a salesperson, before I go make you a training, I have to go do like sales discovery. Why do you want this? Have they been trained before? How do I know that it's good? What's going to be in your mind the expectation for a really good training on discovery? And that'll help you build things and launch it. And I think in order to have like that ongoing conversation, you really need to make sure that you are in tight with your stakeholders with some kind of reoccurring cadence, that operating rhythm of checking in with folks, so that you can partner with them building these trainings. Because sometimes they may take longer to build than somebody might expect. But if you brought them along for that journey, they have skin in the game because they participated in that scoping process. It essentially gives you the leeway and builds trust with the requester that like, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this overnight. Give me X amount of time and I will deliver you the thing that we talked about. And that, tends to avoid those mishaps of the vending machine or what did you build? This isn't at all what I had in mind.
This is the first time I'm hearing this one. I'm going to steal it from you, the vending machine. Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, you just don't have the bandwidth, so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails. These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With SellMeThisPen AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only: revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at SellMeThisPen.ai. So one of the things that I remember a good friend of mine, I asked her, what's the most annoying thing about being an enabler? And she said, random requests. I was like, what do you mean by that? I was like, yeah, despite the fact that we are, a small team, some, sales leaders get on a call and say, hey, we need this training session. And my first question is, are there other people going to really just benefit from this? Or is it only for two people in your team? Let's just figure this out first before, even starting.
Yeah. And I think one thing, so my boss right now, her name's Zena Zhang, she's done a really phenomenal job of, like, we position all of the projects that we do, they are programs, right? And so we call them our big rocks of here's the categories of training that we're focused on for the year. And our group specifically focuses on in-role development. So we've got these mechanisms, whether it's power hour, so that reoccurring training. We've got one on presenting really well, which is often used by, our enterprise strategic sellers and their entire pursuit teams. We've got a program called the Solution Manager Academy. The way that she's been able to position it and that we all, it's in our team charter is here's the avenues that we have to reach people. If you want a request, let's think about how it fits into those. And if not, it gives you an opportunity basically to negotiate rather than just say, saying like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, it doesn't really seem like it fits into our key big rock categories. Maybe we can meet you somewhere in the middle. But I think by providing that like structure and organization, you're essentially training the field and your stakeholders to say, we don't do vending machine training. We're not chasing shiny objects because we've already built these large programmatic things for the entire year based on the executive priorities to do this, this, and this. And if it doesn't fit into that, help me understand how it is a priority and like where it might fall on that line. And I would say that we've actually gotten to a point where we're like 70% of programmatic, like consistent rhythm, 30% ad hoc, which is to be expected if like something will happen, end of the quarter, stuff like that, like random requests from leaders, but we're able to slot it into those other groups, if that makes sense.
I love it. Like this is actually a lifesaver, I think, for enablers out there, just to define the program from the get-go. I know some companies, especially startups, they don't have this luxury. But for large-sized organizations, it's just like getting your upfront contract right away. We're saying, look, this is happening.
Yeah, exactly.
If there's an issue, let's talk about it. Yes, like we have more flexibility about certain things when it's needed, but the structure is already in place. So, and it's tied to the bigger business, goal. So it's not something that we built necessarily as enablers and we think we need it. It's about the bigger, picture.
Totally. Yeah. And back to your other question about working with stakeholders and like misalignments, that idea only works of like having those structures in place if we've spoken to those executive leaders, because they have a vision for their department. And if they can share it with us, that's, we would call it like our launch reinforce sustained model of like, they'll ask us to launch a training, but we don't just want to be launching things like out of a potato cannon at the sales team. We want to make sure that it's reinforced. So we provide some tools in place, which is also part of the negotiation process. Like, if you want me to build your training, we got to make sure that it's got the reinforce aspect, and then sustaining it for the long haul so that you're not, definition of insanity, doing the same training every single year because the field has forgotten about it because we were doing all this shiny object chasing.
Okay, you just open up another interesting topic here. So when it comes to reinforcement, look, you guys did an amazing job. We have a program in place. It's ongoing. It's happening. But obviously, you guys work with a most probably multi-generational and a diverse team in terms of skill set, in terms of culture. It's a global team, right? And especially like doing this remotely, it comes with own set of challenges. But when it comes to reinforcing this, training and learnings to make sure that reps actually not only just learn during the training session and be pumped and engaged, actually apply it and retain it. So in my role, sales managers probably the biggest role here. They know their team, they're on field with them, but there's definitely a big misalignment there. I've seen it myself. Many other folks I'm speaking with have seen it already. So what are some of the strategies or tactics or whatever you call it that might actually help the coach to actually do the coaching that they're supposed to be doing?
Sure. Yeah, and to your first part about like having a field of many generations and many different cultures, I think it's important to just acknowledge that, yes, there are differences and meet people where they are. So like, do I need to run the super tenured enterprise strategic sellers through an intro to discovery workshop? Probably not, because they've been doing it for many years. But what would be helpful to them, and this comes back to like, we just went to go ask them, hey folks, you're in these 2-year-long pursuits chasing 7-figure deals. Like, what's going to be helpful to you when you're in the thick of it, of these pursuits? And what they said to us was like, hey, we want to have anecdotes, stories we can share from the field so that I can say like, here's what your peers are doing. Here's how JLL is poised to help you. So we were able to spin that into our curriculum of bringing in experts from like the marketing team or the product team, because these folks just wanted like, I need talk tracks for my customers in these specific verticals. And I think what was great is that there's an appetite for the folks from the field to actually share what they're doing. I think we can all agree you're going to listen to your peers with much more attention than you might just a random SME from across the department. So we've been leveraging, similar to how you and I are chatting right now, podcast style interviews of our top performers during those sessions, and we record them. And it's just in a way to share best practices amongst each other and then encourage discussion. And on a couple of them, we've done the interview, 20, 30 minutes of pointed questions that are curated. Obviously they know what all the questions are ahead of time so they can prepare their answers. Then we put folks into, this time it actually works, breakout rooms for people to digest with some guided questions. We like using tools like Mural for that. And then coming back to talk about it. And those have been really, I would say, well attended and well reviewed. As people just want to know what are my peers. It's just like talking to executives. If you're selling into the C-suite, they want to know, what are my peers doing? what are they planning for Q4? I think it's very similar for your sellers. And there's a second part of your question. Actually, one of my teammates, Ed Cannon, he's based in London. He does a really nice job of this because he does a lot of work with coaches. I think it's giving them a common language and tools to use. I think most sales leaders, I would hope, want to be good coaches, right? They want to empower their team to be excellent. They may just not have the same common language, or they may have their own, but their peers don't. And so there's a misalignment there. So whatever your methodology is, ours is SMTP, finding ways to give folks, like we have a system built. So we rolled out a process of like, hey, here's the way that we'd like you to coach deals when it comes to forecasting or pipeline development. We taught them the method, then we made sure that the method was operationalized. So it lives in Salesforce. There's a scorecard that you can look at. And then there's a throughput of, they know that they're executives. So to be looking at that report and using that to check. So it creates a nice feedback loop. And I think anytime you're just trying to reinforce things, people need to know, what do you need me to do? Why? How am I supposed to do it? And who's going to check that I'm doing it? And if there's nothing on the last one of who's going to check, no, people won't do it. They've got a lot of things going on. So being very clear about the value to you and the organization, and not only the throughput, but like which eyeballs are looking at it, because that's how they're going to keep themselves on track. There's a quote that I really like of, what gets looked at or what gets reviewed gets managed, but like what is measured gets respected, or inspected is respected. So like if you say they're going to look at it and people are like, okay, fine, I'll do it because you told me to. But as soon as you know that there's a KPI and some kind of feedback loop there, and perhaps a stack ranking or an itemized list of like performance quarter over quarter, we all want to look good. We want to make sure that our teams are successful. And if you know what you're charging for, if you know what the scoreboard is, it's a lot easier to run your plays around that.
And to me, all of this comes from the top. And to your point, if you don't have that, support from the exec team, at least this is what I've seen, that many sales managers, again, with good intentions, but you're running the numbers, you got to hit your quota. They might skip, all these coaching sessions because it's time consuming. And some people really don't have the skill sets, but it seems like you guys provide enough tool and resources to managers to have a guideline when it comes to actually coaching their reps.
Yeah, and I think, we can always be improving, but the thing that I wanted to double click on is like managers, they are swamped and they may not always have time when their reps are in different time zones, especially when you're dealing with a global team. Like for context, my boss is in Australia. We've got people in London, so we're all over the place. But if you provide them, hey, here's tools to help you coach and reinforce on a one-on-one basis. And here is the program that's going to be running on the same schedule. It's happening every single week to send your people to complement what you're doing on a one-on-one. And if they need extra stuff on top of that, here's the other like avenues that you can slot them into. Suddenly, like we want it to feel cohesive and holistic and not just like throwing spaghetti at the wall. You want to make your resources easy to find, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yep. Got your point. That makes absolute sense. So AI is a big thing. We all talk about it. Every product is kind of like an AI product or some AI functionality on top of, their legacy product. First and foremost, do you guys leverage any AI tools? And if you do, what's missing?
Yeah, so I will be honest. Our tech stack, I think a lot of large organizations are probably in a similar situation of the wheels of big companies, they move slow. And so we don't have a super flushed out, mature tech stack. So when it comes to AI for sales and prospecting, we don't have a ton of resources around that. We do have internal tools, which are great. Like we have our own JLL GPT, and we've got some stuff that our customers use to ask questions of their products. But I think that there's an opportunity there. Long story short is we'd like to be there on the roadmap, but I think there's some challenges specifically around like privacy, for example. It's really difficult for us to record customer calls or the in-person meetings, because there's a lot of in-person meetings. Be difficult to gather insights from there. So I'm excited to keep learning about AI, but the short answer is we don't have a ton in play right now for onboarding or everboarding.
Okay. Makes sense. But I'm not going to open this up because it's a big can of worm. And we all know, what's going on in large organizations. But I appreciate you sharing. Look, my last question. Which one is more difficult to make everboarding a success? Hiring extremely fast with little resources, or working with a large established team where different teams and leaders are used to, their own old methods, if you will?
Oh, that's interesting. And honestly, I think I would say they both provide different challenges. Like I was in startup land for most of my career, and it was the first scenario you just brought up. You're hiring like crazy. You've got dozens of people starting every single month. How do you get them on and like into this rhythm? And now being at JLL, this company is legitimately over 250 years old. Like we've been around for a minute. So there's a lot of legacy process and tools and tech, and even the way that our sales cycle, like all of the way that we sell our products is complex to say the least, because we have all these long-term relationships. Yep. And I think honestly, both of those challenges, perhaps it's just because I'm a process lady, I'm an enablement nerd. I really like when things fit into a framework. Both of those can be solved when you have an easy to digest framework for learning and development. I think it's just like if you're selling to a client, you want your value proposition to be clear, easy to understand, and repeatable. You want your customer to be able to go tell all their peers and their internal stakeholders, whoever's going to go sign the check, this is why we're doing it. The same holds true for both the hiring like crazy and not a lot of resources and folks who are used to doing things a certain way. It takes a lot of lobbying, which is why we do so many things around communication. So manager previews, quarterly business reviews, meeting with stakeholders, vetting their concerns, doing an in-depth scoping process so that you can build trust with your buyer, or in this case, your training stakeholders, attendees, and learners. And if you have that framework, the traditional folk, or I think the legacy folks, let's call them, who've been used to a certain thing, hopefully they'll start to see the value and say, okay, I can implement this into my workflow. And for I'm hiring like crazy all the time, it provides a reprieve from some of the chaos and the madness to have that structure in place.
So what I'm hearing is from someone who worked with outreach and now, with JLL, they're completely different in terms of like a structure and how, they look at the business, and they have their own set of challenges. But as an enabler, if you have a framework that is effective and repeatable, it doesn't matter. Yes, you need to deal with, different sort of challenges.
And I think it comes back to like that idea of, again, if you're a vending machine, you'll constantly be chasing the last thing that they requested. And it is a what have you done for me lately shiny object thing. But if you've put together a long-term roadmap and you future-proofed the things that you're building, suddenly, you get to harness the chaos and say, I'm going to take in all these requests. And now that we've built this machine, where can those things fit in this machine, instead of trying to spin up new things over and over again, which I think for both of your, scenarios plays nicely.
But can we do that for startups too? With the fact that they keep, changing?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think you can do that for startups because you can still have a system of like, okay, here's how we're going to train people. We know that these are our key topics. Ask the CEO. I bet they have an opinion about what do I want the sales team to focus on? Is it new logo? Is it expansion? Is it improving this part of the deal cycle? Chances are, if they don't have that for the year, they certainly have it for the quarter. And once you put that in place, you say, here's what we're prioritizing, becomes, again, much easier to negotiate. And I like that term better than just saying no to requests that come in of, here's where we're focused for the quarter. We've built these avenues to meet the field there. These other things, perhaps there are ways that you can use AI to spin up, shorter, quicker form trainings that you can do. But like the larger approaches to learning and development of like, hey, I know that this team needs to be really good at selling product X. We can build a whole program around it instead of just chasing stuff all the time.
Interesting. Yeah, my thought process was like, okay, for startups, we need to just patch things while we do things, while we learn things, and then maybe after we are grown-ups, we have a structured program.
Sure, there's always like, the whole adage of like, I'm building the plane while I'm flying it. But I think enablement, if executives, this is also important to have that type of relationship with your executives, because if executives are constantly asking enablement people, just spin up a training on X, if you are confused, the field is going to be confused and they're not going to remember it. So even in the whirlwind of crazy startup, I'm sure there are a handful of priorities that are the most important things for us to focus on. And we can spin things up to complement that. I think that as an enablement professional, we have an opportunity to control the madness by providing structure and like letting this whirlwind control this madness and like organize everything into the place that it should be. And that's a service that I see that we provide as enablement professionals, is like providing that structure to the field, because their days are crazy.
That is true. Look, I really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you taking time. Brooke, if someone wants to reach out to you, first and foremost, can they and how?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Brooke Bachesta on there, but go ahead and shoot me a note. Or you can email me. It's just my first name dot my last name at jll.com. So brooke.bachesta at JLL. Yeah, I'd be happy to chat.
Amazing. All right. Thank you very much, Brooke. And guys, hope you enjoyed this session and see you soon.
Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
Of course. Bye.